The Rings of Power is a television pogrom on the work of Tolkien. Sorry, programme. I meant programme on the work of Tolkien. And I'm just here enjoying the usual weather in the UK. I wanted to add to my coverage of Season 2 because I saw this article, in which the Rings of Power showrunner compared the destruction of the dwarven city Khazad-dûm in the show to man-made climate change. The show also used the ruination of the world in the Rings of Power as an allegory for climate change in Season 1 as well. And this all makes me about as comfortable as trying to swallow a police baton sideways, because I remember a video I made on the Rings of Power way back now, describing the horrible environmental impact of the show. The massive carbon footprint, the crew, no joke, flying around in helicopters. Could they have any more efficiently made themselves look like hypocritical knobheads? They made the show preachy and then don't even live up to their own preaching. It's become a meme at this point, the sheer number of climate activists and celebrities who get caught flying around on private planes. Because if you don't know, private planes and helicopters reportedly emit huge amounts of CO2. They used the helicopters when filming Season 1. After that, they moved from New Zealand to film in the UK. This season also introduced extra environmentalism in the form of tree men in the Rings of Power who were angry that their forests were being cut down. Then a couple of episodes later, the show filmed the Siege of Eregion in the UK, where the show managed to annoy local environmentalists by, according to the paper The Daily Mirror, cutting down part of Swinley Forest. It's like they're doing it on purpose at this point, and that's without even getting onto the environmental impact of Amazon as a company. I did a video on it, and it isn't good. The sets for the Rings of Power that seem to appear in the show just once. Amazon Studios were allegedly making trees out of polystyrene and had the elves walking on plastic leaves, just to then throw the whole lot in landfill and bury it. I found no figures on how much damage they did to the UK in filming this show while preaching about environmentalism, but exactly how much damage did they do to New Zealand? Well, they don't know. They used multiple vendors to dispose of the waste created by their show and just kind of lost count. Just one of the vendors, partway through filming, had allegedly collected over 355 tonnes of landfill waste, but on the flip side, when they weren't flying around in helicopters and delivering things to landfill, they did encourage the crew to eat vegetarian one day a week. Hollywood just won't stop preaching. While putting together a video, I stumbled upon a story about how the film Star Trek Beyond was an allegory for the UK's exit from the European Union. I've lost count of the amount of shows that are allegories for the orange guy. Hollywood has spent decades pushing feminism now, with a large degree of overlap with the time they spent protecting Harvey Weinstein. I'll say again, Hollywood loves women, but only until they turn 40 and mostly on casting couches. And on that note, I'm going to put together all of my reviews of Season 2 into one long video, so if you want to, you can now listen to the soothing tones of my voice and fall asleep to me talking for quite a long time about the Rings of Power, as episode by episode I go from trying to reserve judgment to realising that Season 2 was yet again a disaster.
This is my house!
Well, a trailer came out for Amazon's Rings of Power Season 2, and whoa, that's even worse than the reception that the trailer for Star Wars Acolyte got, and a lot worse than the trailer for the Fallout series got. Now, in my review of the Fallout series, I talked about how I thought the series managed to capture the feel of the games. It was moments like when Lucy stepped out of the vault to the iconic Fallout theme tune, but I've been replaying Fallout 4 and I think I've changed my mind. In order to really capture the feel of a Bethesda game, there maybe now needs to be a 10 to 20 year gap in between Seasons 1 and 2 being aired, because that's supposedly when we may get Fallout 5, in 2030. The series should have also repeatedly crashed to desktop while you were watching it, and that's fun when you're playing on survival mode in Fallout 4 and haven't saved in over an hour. Fallout 4 is nearing 10 years old now. How is it still a buggy mess? To complete one quest in it, I had to pistol whip Preston Garvey in the face until he woke up. Anyway, what was I talking about? I was talking about the Rings of Power. How bad can this trailer possibly be? It's under 2 minutes long. So what are we getting next season for me to probably laugh a lot at?
An evil, ancient and powerful, has returned.
So we have, it looks like, Sauron, and not sure about what that thing is. Is that supposed to be the Balrog or something? It seems to be attached to the dwarf storyline. We have another fight sequence with Galadriel, that'll be fun. And is that a Chinese elf with a bow that they have there? Are they ever going to explain where she came from in the context of the show? I'm just guessing not. Is there just an elf China somewhere in Middle-earth now that she emigrated from? Or is she there to just make the show look more like current-day LA? If the show was set in current-day LA, that'd be fine, but it isn't. And you maybe have to explain why she looks different to all of the other elves in the context of the show. You have to explain the presence of multiculturalism in a setting that doesn't have it. Most of Earth doesn't even have this kind of diversity. It's not like this in India or China or Japan or Nigeria. In the current day, populations tend towards looking more homogenous over time. It's basic genetics. Middle-earth in the Rings of Power looks less like Tolkien's world and is maybe more like current-day London, only with a lot less sword fights and stabbings. We had the Harfoots last time, and we had characters that appeared to be from a different ethnic group to their own mother. It leaves me with questions. How is this supposed to work? In our world, daughters tend to look like their own mother in some way. They share around half of their DNA. Again, this is just basic genetics, but at this point, who knows who the Chinese lady is? She could be Galadriel's daughter and Liv Tyler's mum at this point, and I wouldn't put it past them. We've kind of gone a bit silly with the representation at this point. We've long passed the point where the story's actually taking a backseat to the representation and people are just turning off.
He worms his way inside your mind.
Jeff Bezos?
The crest of him slithers in.
Jeff Bezos.
I think he has been here. I think he's been here among us all along.
Jeff Bezos has, or do you mean Sauron? He's been among you all along, just in a blonde wig.
Legolas, what do your elf eyes see?
Apparently not Sauron, poorly disguised in a bad wig. The comment section is gold again, saying things like, best part was when Sauron yelled, "It's-a me, Sauron!" Based on this trailer, what is this story even going to be? Are Amazon trying to tell me that Sauron went back to the elves in Eregion again and nobody noticed? He just put a blonde wig on and went back, with the exact same face and nobody noticed. He's supposed to be a master of disguise. Or when they say he's been here all along. Is that in a flashback or something? Last season, it seemed, I remember, they already made a slight change from the Silmarillion, in which making the rings took about 100 years. In the Amazon series, it seemed to take an afternoon. I can see no way of them getting this to make sense. Either it's a flashback, in which case Sauron was there before in his blonde wig, made 16 rings and then went on a sailing trip, then went back and nobody recognised him, or it's the other way around and it doesn't work either way. Another one from the comment section. One wig to rule them all. One wig to hide him. One wig to fool them all, and now they cannot find him. Another commenter said in response to the line, I think he's been here all along, saying, maybe the real Sauron are the friends we made along the way. And from the text under the video, it appears to be the first one of those options. He went back after the story we saw in season 1 and nobody noticed. From under the video it says, Sauron has returned, cast out by Galadriel, without army or ally. The rising Dark Lord must now rely on his own cunning to rebuild his strength and oversee the creation of the Rings of Power, which will allow him to bind all of the peoples of Middle-earth to his sinister will. And that's sounding worryingly similar to somehow Palpatine has returned. And it also doesn't say much for the trailer. If by watching it I have very little idea of what the story is going to be. All of that I have to get from a paragraph of text under the video. What else have we got? Oh, that guy is back with more bad CGI, whoopee, and I can't even remember his name. I reviewed all of season 1. Was his name Plank? I think I mostly called him that due to the very wooden acting. Also, Elrond is back, and oh no, look at the helmet. I tried to think of what that reminded me of, and it was this. Do the costume people hate him or something? Is the actor just horrible in real life, so they purposefully made him look like a dick? But all in all, the trailer didn't move me much in either direction. I think this trailer is more proof of a theory of mine. Audiences have long memories, and a show or film's success or failure may not be due to the actual quality of the product. It's like if you go to a restaurant and they give you food poisoning. even if they clean up their act after that and the food is now fine, how many people are going to give them a second chance? An example of this for me would maybe be the movie Dredd, that I thought was good, and it may have been tainted by the prize Stallone Judge Dredd movie, and it kind of works the other way around, I think. If a place's food has always been good, people will still keep going for a while, even if the standard starts to dramatically drop. You'll just lose more and more customers over time. An example of this for me would be the film Captain Marvel, which I think got more box office success than it deserved as a film because it came out right after Infinity War. And the fact that these two films, Dredd and Captain Marvel, have similar ratings on IMDb kind of shows how broken IMDb is as a review platform. So where I was going with this is, I'm not sure the trailer's that bad. I'm not sure what people are hating it to quite this extent for. I think it may be more to do with the content of Season 1 of The Rings of Power than the actual trailer. There wasn't really a lot in there to go on apart from Halbrand in a bad wig fooling everyone, which suggests that Season 2 is going to be as brain dead as Season 1 was. Will Season 2 be good after all? I don't know. But going off of Season 1, I very much doubt it. And there was very little in the trailer to change my mind.
And the Bob Igers are like, no, what's going on with my stars? No, Captain Kennedy. Ah!
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
The Rings of Power is back on.
What is it?
I've made it through only one of the new episodes, and things are frankly weird already, because exactly why do people making the Rings of Power want it to be Breaking Bad? What's the thinking? Oh, Sauron is going to be like Walter White, Tony Soprano and the Joker this season, huh? And there was me foolishly thinking he was maybe going to be like Sauron. And that rang a bell because the recent Star Wars series The Acolyte showrunner wanted that to be like Breaking Bad as well, instead of, well, like Star Wars. Now, maybe I'm alone, but I kind of liked what they were. I don't want everything to be like Breaking Bad. Is this more of that subverting expectations I keep on hearing about? Call me odd, but I kind of want The Lord of the Rings to be The Lord of the Rings, not Breaking Bad. And why do shows keep on trying to make the bad guys into thirst traps? Something very weird is going on and I don't understand or like it. I did not sanction this. We have the Acolyte trying to ship the Sith Lord Kimia, and now we have the Rings of Power trying to ship Sauron and Galadriel. Is it Reylos again? The people that wanted a relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren in Star Wars, despite him being an evil Sith Lord. The people making these shows seem to find something very alluring about evil characters, and it makes me kind of uncomfortable. And why is this show on a 6.9 out of 10 on IMDb? That's a very generous rating, and I'm totally sure it has absolutely nothing to do with IMDb being owned by Amazon, who also make this series. So where did everything finish up last season? Well, Galadriel had found out that Halbrand was actually Sauron in disguise in a twist so predictable I called it weeks before it happened. So Sauron had left on foot and just appeared back in Mordor a scene later on the other side of the continent, and then bafflingly, Galadriel didn't tell any of the other elves that their greatest nemesis had been living and working among them. Gandalf and one of the Hobbit things had gone on a journey to Rhûn because he wanted to find a constellation in the sky. Not sure how that works because constellations in our night sky tend to, well, they move. But fine, maybe they don't on Middle-earth. The Númenóreans had all gone home to their island, and the elves had forged 3 rings to fight the affliction affecting their people. And that's what Galadriel is in trouble for in this episode, not telling anybody that Halbrand was really Sauron. So in this episode, Elrond runs to the Elves' King with the rings to snitch on Galadriel for not telling anybody in the city of Eregion that Halbrand was really Sauron. And in doing so, Elrond didn't tell anybody in Eregion, including Celebrimbor, that Halbrand was really Sauron. Makes perfect sense, huh? The thing Elrond is damning her for, he did the exact same thing. Elrond is worried that Sauron made the 3 rings as some sort of trap, so he disobeys a direct order from the king and then jumps off a cliff with the rings to stop the king from using them. He goes to one of the elves' elders, Círdan the Shipwright, who is one of the only good things in this episode for me, because he's being played by the actor Ben Daniels, and he's a really capable actor. You may know him from the 2005 Doom movie with The Rock and Carl Urban. This is a $1 billion series, and it's about time they got some capable actors, unlike the lady playing Disa, who before this $1 billion series had only ever acted in a few things before, and it was mostly on UK children's TV. She played a pirate on a game show for kids called Swashbuckle.
No, sorry, Cook, I really can't sing you a song. Anyway, my guitar Sheila fell in the slop, sir.
Surprise! It's Sheila, the slightly sloppy guitar.
Elrond wants Círdan to dunk the rings in the sea, but then Círdan just brings the rings back to the king anyway, rendering the whole section of the plot pointless. It's just going round in circles, and Elrond was wrong anyway, because the rings seemed to save the elves. Speaking of which, last season Sauron ran away from the orcs and left Mordor to go to Eregion, helped make these 3 rings, then got found out as being the big bad guy by the elves because he was being really obvious about it, then walked back to Mordor, then gets captured off camera by the orcs who beat him up. Gets tortured, then convinces the leader of the orcs, Adar, who thinks he's the king of the Southlands, that he's on their side, and tells them Galadriel is in Eregion with a sorcerer working on a way to stop the orcs, and he describes the sorcerer as being like Sauron. The orcs then let him go, and he walks back to Eregion again. He's just going around in circles, and I've genuinely no idea what his plan is, or what his thinking is even supposed to be. He got found out as being the big bad guy of the series, had to run away, so why does he now think it's safe to go back to the elven city of Eregion exactly? Galadriel and Elrond are not there, and they didn't tell anyone he was Sauron, but the problem is that Sauron doesn't know any of that. Galadriel even told the leader of Eregion, Celebrimbor, not to see Halbrand again.
Galadriel, where is Halbrand?
He's gone, and I doubt he will return. And should he ever, none of us are to treat with him again.
What?
But he lets him in anyway for reasons. Season 2 then starts with a flashback to earlier in the story, just after Morgoth had been defeated. So it's a prelude. Morgoth was one of the Valar, so kind of a god in the writings of Tolkien. So one of his followers, Sauron, is trying to take over after Morgoth's defeat and destruction. And Sauron is standing there, trying to make a pitch to some orcs about why they should follow him. And he's giving a very flowery speech, talking about his vision for the future.
Morgoth is gone, leaving us alone and disgraced. But today, a new age begins.
To a bunch of orcs, and he looks like a pretty elf, and the speech is frankly ridiculous. Because orcs in The Lord of the Rings, let's face it, are a pretty savage lot. They're not exactly big thinkers. They're not going to be won over by pretty rhetoric. They respect strength, and that's about it. And Sauron should know all of this. The orcs are ruled by strength.
Many orcs will die.
And this policy, the many of you orcs will die if you join me policy, yeah, it turns out that's not very popular with the orcs. Whoever would have guessed? Also, it turns out that the orcs, the creatures who thrive in and love chaos, aren't that keen on fighting to bring about a new order for Sauron.
No longer will we be hunted as the demons who broke Middle-earth, but rather worship as the saviors who finally healed it.
What would make Sauron think that the orcs have any interest in being saviours? They like eating people.
Doubt me at your peril.
Doubt me at your peril. Why have they made Sauron so camp? This is Sauron in a former incarnation. When he becomes Halbrand, why does his accent change?
That way lies death, friend.
And that is my path.
Stop asking questions, shut up and enjoy the content. Why would an orc care what men think of him? Men to orcs are food. One of the orcs then tries to attack Sauron, and Sauron butchers him in front of all of the other orcs. How? How are they still this far off from Lord of the Rings? Whoever wrote this just doesn't get it at all. Why is Sauron trying to hold a coronation for himself? Why would orcs respect the idea of a coronation, or a rite of succession, or ceremony? Their leaders just tend to be the biggest and most violent orc. So Sauron gets down on one knee to have an ornate crown put on his head, but instead Adar, the father of the orcs, stabs him in the back with it, and the orcs, including their father Adar, then attack Sauron and tear him apart. But if Sauron's plan at this point was to make the rings and mind control people and become powerful, why did he need the orcs anyway? But this is not the end for Sauron. He instead flows through the floor as a black ooze and ends up in a cave absorbing rats and centipedes before splatting down a hillside like a bag of offal. I watched this with other people and I have to agree with one of them when they said this scene was really like Hellraiser. And by now, any and all menace that Sauron had as a character is just long gone. That splat is Sauron, the Lord of Darkness, just before he gets tangled in the wheels of a passing wagon. Sauron absorbs the woman in the wagon and becomes Halbrand, and his accent changes, for reasons. He then meets some human survivors of the now rampaging orcs, and the survivors are Southlanders. Hang on, where is Sauron supposed to be now? Sauron goes with the refugees. Why? I've no idea. This is how he ends up shipwrecked on a raft in the middle of the ocean. He gets on a boat with them off camera. The boat gets sunk by a sea monster while they're trying to get to somewhere safe across the ocean. I have no idea how much time is supposed to have passed or where anyone is. The series still has no feel of either space or time. The makers of the Rings of Power have seemingly learnt nothing, literally nothing from Season 1's failure. But now I have a better idea of where Sauron has been in his story. So he started out here with his coronation and getting stabbed a lot, went on foot maybe several hundred miles south because he ran into refugees from the Southlands, then he went to sea, met Galadriel and went to the island of Númenor. Then he goes back to the Southlands and to Mordor, gets injured, goes to Eregion. They find out that he's Sauron, then he goes back to Mordor on foot again, gets captured by the orcs, then goes back to Eregion again to go back to the same group of elves that found out he was the Lord of all evil last season. Meanwhile, Gandalf is on his way to a place called Rhûn, travelling with the hobbit creature Nori, the female Frodo one. I'm not sure if that is where Gandalf came from in the first place in this story, but maybe we'll find out at some point, and this may come as a shock, but him and Nori get lost and end up going around in circles.
No, it can't be. Stone trees. We're going in circles.
Every character and plotline in the Rings of Power is now going around in circles. Maybe this is actually genius, but I doubt it. The storylines are now all the same shape as the rings are. And there is a shocking lack of character development in this show. They're being tracked by someone in a weird mask, and they're also being followed by another hobbit thing, Poppy, the female Samwise, but at least she had the wit to bring a map with her. Every character in this thing is written as a bona fide idiot. Then Nori and Gandalf blow up a tree, have a feast of live beetles, and everyone breaks into song. So, how is The Rings of Power Season 2? For me, it's much the same as Season 1.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
That's now how I think of Sauron the Lord of all Evil from Lord of the Rings, after episode 1 of season 2 of The Rings of Power. Sauron being reincarnated as a slime, splatting down a hillside and getting tangled in a wagon wheel. That's the burning eye in the sky somehow. In this episode, the actors started singing again. The people I watched it with mostly said the episode was boring, and I fell asleep. On the surface, this episode may not seem so bad, because it lacks anything as obviously and overtly silly as Galadriel being hit in the face by an exploding volcano. And just shaking it off. But the amount it does wrong for me is staggering. I found problems in almost every scene. Right down to the ending, where the sound levels were so bad, I struggled to even understand what a character was supposed to be saying. And the show has now developed the habit of using terms like Valar and Ishtar, taken from Tolkien's writing, and then I don't recall them ever explaining what these terms mean in the show. Because of that, none of the people I watched it with had any idea what the characters were talking about in places. Valar are kind of like lesser gods. Ishtar are kind of magical spirits, or maybe angels, that take the form of wizards, sent by the gods to guide mortals. The last episode finished with lots of singing, and this one starts with singing, which is very efficient because it ensures that I stop caring immediately. We also got the triumphant return of Captain Hey-Ho.
Take it away, Hey-Ho!
Captain Hey-Ho is my name. Being a pirate, that's my game.
And I think I get it now. I think they hired this actress for the singing. I mean, when someone has talent like that, how can you not? And for as embarrassing as that kid's show is, she's surprisingly okay in The Rings of Power. I still maintain that the dwarf storyline in the show is the most promising thing they've got, even if I still find the bridges really silly. How many dwarves exactly a year fall off of those bridges to their doom? How did they even build them? Sadly, we spend quite a bit of this episode also learning about dwarven agriculture. The dwarves, it turns out, grow their food inside a mountain by using a series of mirrors to direct sunlight through shafts dug to the surface. Don't even think about it. Don't worry that barely any sunlight would get through, because as shown, the mirrors would get full sun for maybe half an hour a day, or that mirrors are less than 100% efficient. What are you expecting? Hollywood writers to know how growing food works? The volcano at Mount Doom then explodes again, and the light shafts collapse, so all of the dwarves' crops start to wither. So the dwarves bring in their expert, who tells them the obvious remedy is to set dwarven dig teams to clear the shafts and dig new ones.
Now, the obvious remedy is to set the dig teams to work repairing the shafts and sinking new ones.
Not, just growing the plants outside in the sun. They could maybe try and get food from the elves. No, their plan is to sing at rocks, and shockingly it doesn't work. There were a few good things in the episode though. They brought in some good actors, and this dwarf is one of them. Under all that makeup is allegedly the actor Kevin Eldon, who's a great comic actor from the UK in series like Black Books.
Dirty.
And in this, he's completely wasted. Everyone in the show continues to be an idiot. In episode 2, I got some more clarification of what the characters are thinking, and I use that term very loosely, because this guy is Celebrimbor.
Give me, my lord, but a messenger has just arrived. Can we grant him entry?
The head elven metalsmith, and he'd been told last season by Galadriel that the character Halbrand is not who he seems, and none of them should treat with him again. As in, none of them should talk or associate or make deals with Halbrand, and in this episode, Celebrimbor does all three. Galadriel had found out that Halbrand was actually Sauron, the Lord of all Evil. Yeah, that guy. Also, Elrond found out, and then neither of them told Celebrimbor or anyone else in the city of Eregion. They then left the city despite knowing Sauron had an interest in making magic rings and mind controlling people, and Sauron had told Galadriel his plan when he was trying to get her on his side. She logically knows Sauron has to go back, yet she leaves without telling anybody who he is. And last episode I was confused because Halbrand had just turned up back at the elven city of Eregion, where they'd found out he was the Lord of all evil Sauron, and they just let him in. I don't know why Sauron even went back. Somehow Sauron just seems to know Galadriel and Elrond left and didn't bother to tell anybody, despite the mortal danger. Anyway, that plotline carries on, and Celebrimbor, it seems, decided to not let Halbrand in.
Lord Celebrimbor regrets to inform you. He's unable to grant you entry.
What? You already let him in, dingus. You opened the gate, let him in, and then said, Halbrand, you can't come in. Sauron then just waits in the courtyard until Celebrimbor eventually talks to him, and then convinces him to give him everything he wants. Sauron convinces Celebrimbor that he's a messenger from the gods come to help, and that's when he gets his blonde wig and elf ears, as he appears from a fire with music so loud and poorly balanced that Sauron was talking and I struggled to even understand him. This series cost Amazon a reported $1 billion to make, and it may have worse sound balancing than my YouTube videos do. This effing show, I'd prefer to be watching Amanda Stenberg dancing. I take that back, that's going too far. In this episode, the elves are utterly useless and stupid beyond belief. The Elven King is planning on sending the elves' armies to Mordor to attack Adar, the father of the orcs, and his group, with just the slight problem that they don't even know if the orcs are still there, and they don't know how many of them there are. But the first Elven commander suggests a plan of attacking Mordor from the east, which, looking at a map of Middle-earth, is a truly terrible plan, because the elves don't know how many orcs they're facing or even where they are. It's another roughly 1,000 miles to travel and will leave their army entirely isolated. They'll be very difficult to reinforce in case of emergency, very easy to cut off, and with long and very exposed supply lines. Whereas another one of the Elven commanders just wants the elves to attack the orcs quickly and try and catch Sauron and all of the orcs together, which is also a terrible plan, since the elves don't even know they're all together, they don't know how many of them there are, or where they are. The king sent 2 messengers to tell Celebrimbor that Halbrand was Sauron last episode, but they both got done in off camera, not even sure by who. Orcs, I guess. It appears an unknown number of orcs are now right in the heart of elven lands, and the elves haven't even noticed. And the closest thing this episode gets to a fight scene, this all happens off camera. So what for me would be the most logical thing to do if you were the king here? For me, send out scouts to find the number and locations of the enemy and try to find the messengers. Take the entire army that you're going to send to Mordor and send it to Eregion instead. Eregion is on the way to Mordor. Instead, Galadriel's plan is to load up the elven army onto ships, sail it this way through the ocean and up the river Anduin and attack Mordor from the west. So her plan is to load up the elven army onto ships and sail it through the ocean, where she knows from season 1 there's a giant ship-destroying sea monster.
What says the commander of the northern armies? Galadriel.
We should send ships up the Anduin. Invade Mordor from the west.
The writing on the show is terrible. It's embarrassingly bad. And the king then says, see to the preparations.
See to the preparations.
What preparations? Which of the 3 plans are you going with? Which one should they prepare? Galadriel then tries to suggest to the king that Sauron may not even be in Mordor any longer, and that his true goal is to mind control everyone using rings, and for that he needs Celebrimbor. And the king responds, Sauron is alone and without army or ally. And how does the king know that when Sauron was last seen heading to Mordor and the elves believe he was going to try and get rid of Adar and take control of the orcs? As far as they know, he could have done it. As far as the elves know at this point, Sauron could have already taken Eregion. The Elven King is convinced that the city of Eregion and Celebrimbor will be fine, despite having premonitions every night about the city being destroyed, and despite the messengers he sent never coming back, because the city has thick walls, but that doesn't exactly help if the gate is really thin and fragile, which would be an issue if they didn't just leave it open anyway. Galadriel wants to go back to Eregion because she's convinced Sauron is going there, but Gil-galad, the Elven King, doesn't want to send Galadriel because, he says, it's said that once Sauron has obtained a being's trust, he can manipulate them more easily from then on. And it doesn't occur to either Galadriel or Gil-galad that this could also apply to both Celebrimbor and Elrond, and this strikes me as being such a lazy piece of writing. Instead of making Sauron get his way by being clever, they make Celebrimbor into an idiot. And weird fact, Galadriel and Gil-galad are kind of supposed to be related. Despite her looking and acting like she's his junior, she is in fact the sister of one of Gil-galad's grandparents. The king will only allow Galadriel to go if she goes along with Elrond. Elrond, however, says no, but changes his mind for reasons off camera. So now the Elven King is going to send only 6 elves, including Galadriel, to Eregion, a city that may well have fallen already, as far as he knows. But to be safe, the party won't be led by Galadriel, who Sauron had fooled. It will be led by Elrond, who he also fooled. And instead of being led by the General of the Elves, or any of the other generals of the Elves, it will be led by Elrond, the Herald and Poet. Meanwhile, Gandalf is still going to somewhere called Hrun. Him and the Hobbit things are being tracked through the desert by strange people in bug masks, and I still have no idea what's going on with the wizards who turn into moths. Gandalf and the Hobbit things have to hide from the people in masks. They have to take a detour through a desert. Gandalf then passes out because they're travelling in the middle of the day in the blazing sun instead of at night, but luckily there just happens to be a functioning well over the next sand dune. The Hobbit things drag the passed out Gandalf, get some well water, and make so much noise doing it that it attracts the bad guys.
I've got it!
So Gandalf does some magic badly again and blows the hobbits away in a whirlwind. The show has brought in the actor Ciarán Hinds as a dark wizard. He's a fine actor, but sadly, I don't think he can save scripts of this quality unless he tries to rewrite them.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
Episode 3 already, and according to IMDb, this is the lowest rated episode of the show ever. I don't even trust IMDb because they're owned by Amazon, and Amazon also make this show, so I have no expectation of IMDb being fair or impartial. On IMDb, this series is sitting on the same rating as 1982's Conan the Barbarian, and for me it falls so laughably short of that in quality that it rolls back around to not being funny again.
Look at the strength of your body, the desire in your heart. I gave you this. Contemplate this on the tree of woe.
Because Conan is one of my favourite performances from the sadly late James Earl Jones. Maybe put in the comments your favourite James Earl Jones performance, and I'll even accept Exorcist II: The Heretic.
I will spit a leopard.
Individual episodes of The Rings of Power are rated higher on IMDb than the movie Dirty Harry is, and I'm sorry, I just don't get any of this. How any episode can be that high, or why this episode is supposedly the worst. The highest rated episode was back in season 1, and I can see no real difference in quality between the alleged best and the alleged worst episode of this thing. They all seem to have the same problems, and this episode is once again full of them. But at least this episode had some action in it. We got a surprise twist that I saw coming over 2 years ago, because way back in season 1 in 2022, we saw the character Isildur trapped in a burning building when the roof collapsed on him. So in that review of episode 7, I said that he'd be fine. It's the prequel problem yet again. Isildur is this guy that cuts Sauron's finger off later in the story, so he can't get done in by a roof, can he? So how did he survive that? Well, I don't know. It all happened off camera and he didn't even get burned. The character Miriel, the Queen Regent of Numenor, was just standing close and she ended up being blinded. Though they keep on forgetting in this series that she's not supposed to be able to see things.
No one kneels in Numenor.
That's the level of writing in this show. They didn't even bother to show how Isildur managed to escape unscathed from a burning house falling on his face. He survived it like Galadriel survived taking an exploding volcano to the face. And no, that's not a euphemism. It happened off camera. I remember saying at the time, I don't see how they're going to make this work. How can they have him escape and yet be separated from everyone else? I couldn't think of a way, and by the looks of it, neither could the writers, so they just did it all off camera. All this happened, and none of the other Númenóreans even went looking for Isildur, including his own father and friends. The only exception was Isildur's horse Beric, who refused to leave with everyone else and instead went looking for him. They wrote his horse, caring more about him in this story than his own dad. His dad was heartbroken, just not enough to bother looking for him. So Beric goes around whinnying, and I just love that they subtitled the horse. Beric then fights off a group of orcs and quite easily finds Isildur trapped in a cave full of spiders webbed to a wall and about to be eaten. Beric then frees Isildur by biting and kicking at the web. And they have to fight their way out of the spider cave together. Isildur then tries to go and find the rest of the Númenóreans on the way, meets a young woman who stabs him in the thigh. Don't worry, he'll forget about that injury by the next scene, as well as the burns he didn't get from the building falling on him. Isildur is convinced that everyone will be waiting for him at the Númenórean camp, but the girl has already been there and knows they're all long gone.
The survivors will be waiting for us where we made camp. My father too.
I think you may have missed them.
You don't know my father. You've already been there, haven't you?
I was searching for someone too. Nothing left but hoof prints and mud.
But she did find a map to an old Númenórean settlement called Pelargir, so they go there instead. On the way they get ambushed by bad guys when Isildur tries to help an old man, and they get saved by the elf Arondir from Season 1. One of the evil humans then runs away on Beric the horse. The actor playing Arondir is still portraying no emotion whatsoever. This is him pleased.
Pleases me to see you, Isildur.
This is him feeling relief.
I wish I could share my relief with your father.
This is him in the heat of battle. This is him heartbroken and grieving. This is him guilty that he failed to save someone he loved.
Arrows, not easily forgotten by human flesh.
He then says to Isildur about his father, "He did not abandon you." And yes, he bloody did. He took other people's word that Isildur was gone and then just left the continent. The elf was only in the woods to gather firewood for a funeral because the character Bronwyn, a leading character from Season 1, croaked off camera. And what? She was fine last time we saw her. But the actress, it seems, declined to return for Season 2, so now that story is once again a complete mess. Last season we followed her lost son, travelling to look for her, thinking she'd not made it, just to find her alive at the Númenórean camp. And all that just to have her expire off camera in between seasons. And also, off camera, Arondir and Theo's relationship has gone from this to this.
And anything you were to me is ashes now.
And I have no idea why Arondir is even still here. He was an elven scout supposed to watch the land for the return of the orcs. The orcs returned, he should have gone north to warn the elves with Galadriel. Instead, he stayed in the south because he wanted to get laid. Isildur and Theo then have a conversation next to this, what turns out to be an aqueduct, and this is to deliver water, presumably to a settlement that's between two rivers on the map. The Númenóreans did a major construction project to bring fresh water to a settlement that already had fresh water, and then they abandoned it. It seems a real lack of love and attention went into this series. Isildur and Theo then set off at night to go and get the horse back, find the camp of the wild men, which is then attacked by something off camera. Probably tree men. So we got some action at least, and finally the show may actually have a heroic character, and in many ways my favourite character now in the whole show. In terms of heroism, charisma, acting ability, a viable character arc, and that is, I mean, who else? It's Beric. Beric the horse is the closest this show gets to a hero. By saving Isildur, that horse just saved the entire of Middle-earth. I did also see someone say that Beric also has leading man good looks, but that may have just been the YouTube of Vorsh. While all this is happening, somehow the Númenóreans have already arrived home on their island. The timeline of this show is just all over the place. The scenes with Isildur and the Númenóreans are put together like they're happening at the same time, but the Númenóreans made a journey across thousands of miles of ocean, which should take weeks, if not months. Where has Isildur been all this time? I tend to watch this show with other people, and I find it useful to get their reactions, because they're clearly more normal than I am, and the way this show jumps between storylines just left them completely confused. They could barely even remember what happened in Season 1, over 2 years ago, and found the story just disjointed and difficult to follow, even with me there to explain it, and even I can't explain the wizards that turn into moths. A lot of the writing in the show is just a mystery. After the dwarves' mine collapsed last episode and they lost their food supply, the dwarven prince got invited to meet with the elf leader Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor thanks him for making the journey. Once again, the writers seem to have forgotten that the elven city is right outside the dwarves' front door. The elves know about their troubles and want to help them, and the dwarven prince says something dumb even by the very low standards of this show. He asks them,
"And exactly what aid do you think you could provide?"
"Well, let me see now. You're running out of food and they have lots of it." When the elves tried to make a deal with the dwarves for Mithril, they offered them loads of food and wood. The dwarves desperately need food. The elves have food, yet the dwarven prince can think of no possible way the elves can help the dwarves. Instead, the elves end up offering magic rings that will supposedly remove the curse on the dwarves' mountain in exchange for Mithril, but the dwarven king won't accept that, will he? Surely. He was implacably opposed to the idea, to the extent he disowned his own son over this issue. But it seems by the end of this episode, he's changed his mind. Off camera. I've absolutely no idea why. Meanwhile, Adar and the orcs are trying to convince a group of trolls to attack the elven city where Sauron is, and the makers of the show can't help but throw up their politics all over Tolkien, and politics just ruins everything. That's why the orcs are getting rewritten in the show, and there's now an orc with a wife and a baby who doesn't want to go to war.
But we are safe here. We have a home. Must we go to war again?
This article kind of sums up why they did this. In demonising orcs, the ugly monstrous enemy of the elves, did J.R.R. Tolkien betray a belief that some races are worse than others? That's the debate that's been at the heart of claims in the British press recently, accusing the Lord of the Rings author of harbouring racist views. And for me, it's kind of unclear what Tolkien's orcs even are. In The Hobbit, orcs and goblins were kind of the same thing. While Tolkien was writing the stories, he played around with a lot of different ideas and never really settled on a final one for where the orcs came from. In earlier drafts, they were made of stone by Morgoth. In the Book of Lost Tales, they were supposedly made directly from the earth using subterranean heats and slime. In the Silmarillion, they were instead corrupted elves, and it isn't even clear in Tolkien that there were female orcs. When questioned by a child in a private letter sent by his mum, Tolkien said, "There must have been orc women." And that, it seems, is the entire basis for this inclusion in the series. Tolkien humouring a child. We don't even know what the question was. And there's no reason to take that one explanation more seriously than the other 3 explanations. Less so, in fact. It's just from a private letter, not even an official book. So from this, it's unclear to me if orcs are even a race. Where did the idea of fantasy races start? Was it in Dungeons and Dragons? Race is a term that has been used to describe a group of humans with distinct characteristics and shared ancestry. I don't think, under any of the origin stories there, orcs could be described as being a race. They're fantasy monsters. This line of thinking goes on in an article in Polygon. No matter if orcs are made from stone or beasts or corrupted mortals, each origin is just a fictionalised version of the sorts of stories racists have always come up with to explain why it's okay to brutalise the fellow human beings they're brutalising. The idea that a category of person can be inherently evil, the monster race, is the thorn embedded in the heart of much of the fantasy media that grew from Tolkien's work, in ways that are still being unpacked and untangled today. These people have issues. They seem determined to project their prejudices onto the work of Tolkien, and they consistently look for allegory in the work of a man that, in his own words, supposedly from the foreword to The Lord of the Rings 2nd edition, quote, disliked allegory in all its manifestations and always had done so since he grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I dread to think what these same people would make of Mario jumping on a Goomba or Donkey Kong kidnapping that woman. Meanwhile, on the island of Numenor, some people are trying to replace the Queen Regent for losing a lot of people on the military adventure in Middle-earth she took them on, and being too close to the elves. She has possibly the worst guards I've ever seen that just lets someone strike the blind queen in the face.
Is this how we repay our fallen? It's only the beginning of our mourning.
And it looks like Chancellor Pharazôn, her cousin, is going to try to steal the throne. He gets popular support because, for reasons, the Queen admits to having an elven artefact, and a giant eagle turns up at her coronation, which was supposed to be a good omen for her, according to this exact episode. But Pharazôn walked up to the eagle first, so now he's king, I guess. And looking at the scenes from Numenor, the makers of the Rings of Power are yet again splurging diversity all over the screen. And this would be fine in a sci-fi. It's fine in a series like Babylon 5 because it matches the world setting. But sadly it doesn't work on a group of people on an island, isolated for generations in a fantasy world. Because to cut it short, if you take a group of American guys and a group of Japanese women and put them on an island, some will either have kids together, or within some years there won't be anyone left through old age. But if they have kids, within a generation the kids will all look like a mix of their parents. You'll have a new, homogenous group. Maybe speaking some kind of odd language that's a mix of Japanese and American English. Culturally, who knows what you'd end up with? Maybe sushi paste that comes out of a can like Cheese Whiz. Sleek motorcycles with truck nuts hanging off of them. It doesn't bear thinking about. Isolation leads to homogeneity, unless there's some sort of social or geographical limitation. That's why Japanese people share a lot of characteristics with each other. So looking at the Numenorians they've created for the Rings of Power, I can only assume that the Rings of Power's diverse and wonderful rainbow folk must have some ironclad laws against people of different skin colours breeding.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
The Rings of Power There were some things in this episode that I actually thought were promising, and if anything, that kind of makes the show even more frustrating for me. The episode showed some real promise. It actually made me feel something in places, and by the end, it managed to lose me so badly that I fell asleep again. That's 2 episodes in a row now where that has happened, and recently I've even had trouble sleeping at night, just not it appears while watching The Rings of Power. So, wasted potential, maybe not a great example of TV, but it appears to be very functional as a cure for insomnia. There should be a lot of potential here, the money they had, they've got Lord of the Rings, and it mostly just gets wasted. Once again, they brought in more very talented actors and then barely did anything with them. For example, later on in the episode there's a scene with 2 Ents. Tree people.
Winter bloom nourished many of those trees from seed and sprout. Do not ask her to speak more of it.
They are no different from them!
And now you've seen them. Can you tell me who's playing them? Yes, no. I mean, the actors did a fine enough job, but that's Jim Broadbent and Olivia Williams. Jim Broadbent was briefly in Game of Thrones, he was in Hot Fuzz, he was Bridget Jones's dad, he's been acting since 1971. This is the sort of actor I'd really want to see in the main cast. Olivia Williams was in The Sixth Sense, she's been acting since 1992. These are serious actors and they give them so little to work with. You don't even get to see their faces. They also have Kieran Hines in the cast, who's a fine actor. He was Mance Rayder in Game of Thrones. In this, he's playing a non-character called Dark Wizard. I say it was promising because we start off with Elrond and Galadriel and their company of elves going to Eregion to warn the elven smith Celebrimbor about Sauron, the Lord of all evil. Infiltrating his city to make rings that will bind all the creatures of Middle-earth to his will. So, being in a real hurry in a race against time, they give them horses, right? Wrong. They go on foot. This show is so dumb. They maybe wanted to ape shots like this from the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings without understanding why they were like that. They had to go over mountains and take back routes where horses couldn't go during that film to avoid being seen by Sauron and the Ring Wraiths. In this series, they copied the aesthetic without understanding it. But despite that, this part felt to me maybe the closest that this show has ever felt to the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films. I think the reason why is that we actually see someone undergoing a journey with a purpose in this episode. We see something approximating an actual quest, instead of just teleporting around. It never occurred to me before quite how important the journey is in Lord of the Rings. And The Hobbit as well, I suppose. It's the journey and what happens along the way that makes the story. And I was kind of even feeling the Rings of Power for a moment during this, but the show never seems to take the time to build characters. Granted, the show was frenziedly hurling diversity at the camera yet again, like it was a replacement for writing characters, and it isn't. We have a group of elves with a level of diversity that makes them look like the Power Rangers lineup. But what multiple of them didn't get were names, or many lines of dialogue, or characters. As far as I can tell, this guy's name was Token Black. I think they may have let the female Asian elf speak once or twice, and the black male elf got a few lines and a scream. Is racism solved yet? How many POC elves do we need to cast before racism's solved? It kind of brings up problems, because if this is supposed to be in canon with the Peter Jackson films, where did all the elven minorities go before Lord of the Rings? Valinor, or did the Elven King just use them as cannon fodder in an upcoming battle? Where did they all go? But despite all of that, I was feeling it. The small group of elves were trying to get to Eregion. The main route was blocked due to a destroyed bridge, and despite Galadriel's warnings, Elrond was going to march their group into a trap, and it kind of had my interest. Then as usual, it cut away to an altogether different storyline and it lost me immediately. It cut to Gandalf meeting Tom Bombadil. Yes, they really put in Tom sodding Bombadil, and for that part, they got Rory Kinnear from the Royal Shakespeare Company to play Tom Bombadil.
Pardon me, I don't suppose you've seen a pair of halflings come this way?
See, you found the goat.
And then it cuts to the hobbit things that had been blown away by a magical whirlwind, got lost and met some long lost other hobbit things, and I literally couldn't care less about the hobbit things. Every time the show gets close to having a serious tone, or builds any kind of drama, the hobbit things bungle in and ruin it to start falling over, eating beetles or singing about snails. I was kind of getting into the Elrond and Galadriel storyline, and the show then didn't go back for another 20 minutes, and by then the episode had completely lost me again. By the time it went back to Elrond and Galadriel, I was done.
What is this place? I feel no rest here. Even the trees seem ill at ease.
Daimon! Don't let go!
This is all the lines this character got. So when he gets got by some Barrow Wights in a trap, ghosts, spectres, revenants, so yeah, Token Black gets done in by the Wights, pun entirely intended. Elrond walked them into the same trap that the messengers had gone into off camera and got done in. And how did he do that? I don't know. He walked into it off camera as well. How did Sauron even set this trap up? I don't know. That happened off camera as well. The Wights do in Token, who from the subtitles is called Daemor, and why should I care? There's no real impact to his loss, because they never spent any time building this character. Just compare this to Boromir meeting his end in the Peter Jackson films, and you'll see exactly why Rings of Power falls so short. The elves' weapons do nothing to the Wights, but the elves are saved by Elrond, who knows that the Wights can only be hurt by the weapons they were buried with. So they open a burial mound, get weapons, and the elves defeat the Wights. That scene lasted 5 minutes, and then we cut away again for another quarter of an hour to instead follow Isildur and then the Hobbit things again. We then get a 2-minute conversation between Galadriel and Elrond that also adds nothing. Then one of the no-name elves comes in and interrupts to say they've heard drums. Then we cut away again for another 10 minutes to go back to Isildur. And when we come back to Galadriel, it's night again. How long have they been travelling since the start of this episode? No idea. Absolutely no idea. Not only did the elves fail to spot an army of orcs marching into their lands, the orcs were beating drums while they were doing it. The orc army is heading to the elven city of Eregion, and on the way they're hunting horses. One of the orcs fires an arrow, misses the horse, but in the whole empty woods manages to hit one of the diversity elves in the chest. Galadriel then tries to comfort him, and the ring she's wearing heals him. Galadriel then sends the others to go back and warn the Elven King to not send the Elven army out to sea in ships to sail past a giant ship-destroying sea monster to attack the orcs who aren't even there any longer, and instead send the army to Eregion. Galadriel then tries to solo the entire orc army. This show is very silly. Galadriel immediately gets herself surrounded and then gets captured by Adar. It's just so dumb. The correct approach for her maybe would have been reconnaissance, maybe try to find their leader and put an arrow through his head from range. I even would have accepted her doing a Legolas and kiting the orcs while firing arrows at them. One of the people I watched it with then asked, is she on Beric the horse right now? And sadly I doubt it, because last time we saw him, Beric was on the other side of the continent. But in this show, that doesn't really rule it out because it happens all the time. Beric also may be a better fighter than Galadriel. At least Beric knows when to pull back when he's outmanned. Considering how important it is that this news gets to the king, Galadriel probably should have gone with the others in case they got attacked on the way. I think part of the problem is that this show may be too short to enable the scope of the story they have in mind. They probably needed 20 or 24 episodes a season for this, because there are 4 separate stories in this episode and they're all half-baked. Elrond and Galadriel is plot 1. In plot 2, Gandalf follows the stars in the sky, then follows a goat and meets Tom Bombadil, tries to break off a tree branch, gets eaten by a tree, and Tom tells him that it's his job to defeat the Dark Wizard and Sauron. In plot 3, the Hobbit things wake up in a desert where they landed after being blown away by a magic whirlwind. They survived somehow off camera. They're being tracked by the bad guys in bug masks when they happen upon a diverse Hobbit thing who they follow back to his diverse village of other Hobbit things, and they find out that they all may be related. An ancestor of Lenny Henry apparently came from this village and took a caravan of settlers to go looking for the Shire. Never made it, and instead they became nomads. In plot 4, Isildur and Arondir take a group from Pelargir to go looking for Theo, who I suspected was taken by tree men last episode. Isildur is starting to fall for the woman who stabbed him last episode. Arondir exposes her as having a brand that means she swore allegiance to Adar and the bad guy orcs, and ties her hands before she stabs anyone else, and they go on searching for Theo. Isildur then steps into quicksand, doesn't listen to Arondir, flails around like an idiot, and him and Arondir get eaten by a giant worm.
Be still. I said it's all right. Give me your hand.
Stabby Girl prods the worm with a stick, it comes back out, and Arondir cuts his way through its stomach. Then night falls off camera, Isildur frees the girl's hands, she pulls a sword on him and gets twatted by an angry tree man. In reality, she'd probably be done, but she shakes it off. The tree men are mad because orcs and wildmen have been cutting their forest down and they don't like axes and swords. Arondir then uses his elf powers of ultimate blandness to make friends with the trees. Isildur is about to get romantic with Stabby Girl when the tree men release Theo and the wild men captives, and among the wild men is Stabby's missing fiancé. So Isildur loses the girl and everyone is friendly, having seemingly forgotten that the wild men group was going to cut their throats just last episode. Plots 2, 3 and 4 in this episode were pretty much a complete waste of time.
So you found the goat?
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
So you found the goat?
The Rings of Power is Amazon's attempt at a prequel to Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Theirs is a fantasy story that covers the period of time where the rings got made and the Dark Lord Sauron rose to power before being defeated, before rising to power again. The timeline to the Rings of Power is all over the place, and the plot is making increasingly little sense. Characters keep on changing their whole motivations off camera, the show will cut away from a story, and when they cut back, an entire city will have been built. They put two stories back to back like they're supposed to be happening at the same time, when logically they can't be. I have no idea what the timeline is supposed to be. I'm not even sure if any of the different stories are supposed to be chronological at this point, because the elves were going to send their army on ships to attack the orcs in Mordor just a few episodes ago, and they were going to sail their ships right past the giant ship-destroying sea monster. The elves had hoped Sauron would be there in Mordor with Adar and the orcs so they could get them all at once. Elrond and Galadriel were supposed to be going to the elven city of Eregion to warn them about the Dark Lord Sauron maybe trying to infiltrate their settlement in order to make rings to mind control the people of Middle-earth. And when they are almost there, they run into an orc army. Galadriel gets captured when she tries to take on the orc army alone for reasons, and the rest of them go back to warn the king. And at seemingly the same time it took the orcs to finish their journey going from roughly here to here, the elves have gone on foot from here to here. The orc army has also walked right up to the largest elven city without anyone in the city noticing, all while beating drums on the way. Elrond went back to tell the king about the orc army and the pressing need to change plans, so instead of going by ship to Mordor, the elves need to cancel that and instead take the elven army to Eregion to meet the orc army. And what does the king say? Our army cannot defeat both Adar and Sauron. But that was the whole plan. just a couple of episodes ago, the plan he agreed to in episode 3.
If we move swiftly, we may be able to crush 2 spiders with 1 boot.
He just changed his mind off camera, did he? Episodes 3 and 5 were written by different people. Did they not talk to each other? I didn't even manage to fall asleep during this one. It may have been the anger. This episode spends a lot of time focusing on the villains, including Pharazôn, who seized power in Numenor somehow off camera, and also his obnoxious son, and they're throwing their weight around with their newfound power. Numenor is split into 2 factions, the King's Men, who back Pharazôn and hate the elves, and the Queen's faction, who like the elves and will go on to found Gondor. The show does a better job of building up Pharazôn and his son as heelish bad guys than they managed to do with Sauron, the Lord of all evil. This show has kind of started to make me sad for all of the missed potential, because I was thinking more about Sauron in his splat form, getting tangled in the wagon wheel and attacking that lady, also off camera. And it's long since occurred to me that most of the important plot points of this show seem to happen off camera. The rule of writing is show don't tell, the Rings of Power tends to do neither. And I was thinking about what I would have wanted to see, what would have made me happy. And the first obvious thing for me was, I think I wanted to see Sauron actually attack that woman. Seeing this monstrosity do whatever he was supposed to do to that woman would build him up quite well as a bad guy, and that's something that the show has kind of been sorely missing. But thinking more about it, I realised I would have redone this whole section. Found a different way for Sauron to get done in. I would have cut this part altogether. And instead, I would have had Sauron meeting this woman at night. Have her sat at a campfire with her wagon and horse in the background, and have Sauron slithering across the ground towards her, a black shape in the darkness stalking up to her. I would have made it horror, essentially. Have her horse get more agitated as Sauron creeps closer, have her go over and comfort the horse and then sit down again, and then suddenly Sauron is on the woman, latching on and absorbing her, pouring black ooze into her eyes and mouth. It would have worked in a symbolic way as well, to show Sauron's insidious nature, how he moves unseen through the world and in the darkness and takes people over. But we can't have the villains being villainous, can we? Then journalists may have to stop writing articles one-handed about how hot Sauron is. But first in this episode, we go to the Dwarven Kingdom of Khazad-dûm, where they were in trouble. They grow all their food inside a mountain, using channels cut in the rock to let light in. Never mind that there seem to be laughably small amount of crops for the population they have, or that not enough light would get through. Hollywood writers consistently betray that they have absolutely no idea how agriculture works and have no interest in learning. Because this garden in the Hobbit Things village last episode would not only not feed a village, it would barely feed one person for a week or two. The dwarves' light shafts collapsed after an earthquake, and their solution was to dig more. Instead of, asking the elves for food, or just growing food outside in full sunshine, maybe planting a nice orchard. But the king of the dwarves, who was implacably opposed to giving the elves mithril to save themselves last season, because if the gods had decided it was the elves' time, who were the dwarves to question it? Well, he sure changed his mind fast when it was the dwarves' time, and I don't know why, because it happened off camera. But the elves and the secret Sauron made magic rings for the dwarf lords to cure the curse on their people. The king, with his new magic ring, then goes around in this episode and directs the dig teams with his new magical powers to cut new light shafts and save the dwarves from idiocy-induced starvation. Okay, so far so bad. What really capped it off for me was this speech.
Pity those who dwell above, slaves to the sun, chained to a ceaseless rhythm of waking and sleep.
In Khazad-dûm, we are free of its tyranny. Here,
we bring the sun to us.
The problem is that what he just said there equally applies to the dwarves as the people living on the surface. This whole plotline was all about the dwarves' dependence on the sun, and when it sets for the people on the surface, it sets for the dwarves as well, and it should have been obvious to the person that wrote it. Then they should have just crossed this out and tried again. But this section did reveal the true villain of the Rings of Power, the script. Because going right back to the start of Season 1...
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward.
This one for me is not actually the actor's fault. The guy playing the Dwarven King is very experienced as an actor, he puts in as good a performance as he could be expected to do. The problem is that the person that wrote this episode, well, this is his second ever writing credit, and it's on a $1 billion show. You have a guy with very little experience being overseen by the showrunners, JD Payne and Patrick McKay, and they also have one writing credit before this show. Amazon, if you want to pay me large amounts of money to correct all of the mistakes in your scripts before you spend hundreds of millions of dollars on making them, I'd do that for you, if just to stop you disgracing Tolkien. And why have the dwarves not had a single fight sequence in a season and a half of TV? The elves and the dwarves celebrate the dwarves' salvation together, and they make the Gate of Durin off camera. And the ring forged by Sauron and the elves is already having a negative effect on the Dwarven King. He's growing greedier, he's upped taxes on his own people, and he's offering rings to the other Dwarven kingdoms in exchange for half of everything they dig up in their mines. So he's invited emissaries from the 7 great Dwarven realms. And shouldn't it be 6? Because there are 7 rings, but 1 is for his kingdom, so why would there be 7 emissaries? I also don't know why any of the kings would accept this deal of half of everything they mine in exchange for a ring of unknown and unproven effect. The king has also decided to mine deeper into the earth to find more gold and jewels against his own prior orders, and instead he's probably going to find an angry Balrog. And as far as I can tell from this episode, why is the Balrog so angry? Well, it appears it could be Saphir Nomvete singing. Most of the episode is spent with Sauron and the elven smith Celebrimbor bickering like a married couple, and the relatively normal people I watched this show with got very bored with it all. How did one of them describe it? Let me see. The quote was, "It's tedious." Sauron tries to manipulate the elves into making another 9 rings, this time for the kingdoms of men, that will allow him to control them. And where is he getting the mithril from? The dwarves, I guess, must have given the elves more off camera, but if it isn't that, I genuinely don't know. I also don't know how the other elves just came to accept Halbrand as Anatar. We saw him trying to convince Celebrimbor, but off camera it appears all of the other elves in Eregion somehow accepted Halbrand, suddenly reappearing with a blonde wig and elf ears, and nobody suspected a thing. The Dwarven Prince then goes to see Celebrimbor because the ring has changed his father and made him greedy and reckless, and Celebrimbor says, "There can't be anything wrong with the rings. They use the exact same method and tools that they used to make the 3 for the elves to make the 7 for the dwarves. It must be fine, because they did everything the same in making the 7 as they did for the 3, apart from, making 7 rings instead of 3 and making them in different shapes." The elves in this show have a rule of 3 that I don't think was anywhere in the original Tolkien stories. I think it was an invention for the show for season 1. 1 will always corrupt, we were told. 2 will divide, but with 3, there is balance. So the 9 rings for men, we are told by Sauron, is 3 groups of 3. So why exactly did the elves make 7 rings for the dwarves? Shush, it's the Rings of Power. At this point, are you really expecting any of this show to make sense?
If you only knew the power of 1, the power of 2, the power of many. No!
See, you found the goat.
The Rings of Power is Amazon's attempt at a prequel to The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Theirs is a fantasy story that covers the period of time where the Rings of Power got made by the Dark Lord Sauron. And just none of this story holds water. In episode 2, when the elves were deciding what to do about the rampaging orc horde destroying the southlands of Middle-earth, we saw the elves planning, and were told by an elven general that according to elven spies, the Dark Lord Sauron had been spotted going into Mordor.
Sauron.
Our spies indicate that Sauron was last seen travelling into Mordor. We believe he intends to supplant Adar and claim his armies.
So, I'm supposed to believe that somehow the elven spies are so good that they saw one man who they didn't know and they weren't even looking for leaving the city of Eregion and going into Mordor, but they didn't spot him coming back. And I'm also supposed to believe that the very same elven spies are also so inept that they didn't spot an entire army of thousands of orcs marching into elven lands right up to the elves' largest city, the same city of Eregion that Sauron was somehow seen leaving, while the orc army were marching on foot carrying burning torches and beating drums. This show expects me to believe these two things at the same time, and this for me is a story losing all suspension of disbelief. This is untenable. The writing on this show is complete garbage. I hate this show. If I wasn't reviewing it, I would have tuned out already. None of the elven spies noticed this coming. This. The best defence I can give of this is maybe the elven spies had been corrupted by Sauron. Off camera, of course, because the show never actually demonstrates any of that. But Sauron is shown warping other people's minds in this episode. Sauron just takes over command of the elven city and nobody says anything. I watched this with other people as usual, and when it got to the end, I asked them what they thought of it, and one quite melodramatically said, "I don't want to talk about it." A woman in the group said, "I'm confused," and someone else said there was not enough Beric the horse. So to balance out the pain and apologise for this one, I'm going to add footage to this video of the Spanish pole vaulter Clara Fernandez. You see, I'm just a big fan of female sporting excellence, and yes, that is the excuse I'm going with. I'm not even sure what to make of this episode. Yet again, I didn't even manage to fall asleep. This one, if anything, made me laugh because it was just so pitiful.
Now, there simply cannot be a fault in your rings.
Now, to explain why I find this funny, you need to understand that in British English, ring is often used as coarse slang for someone's bottom, specifically the ring-shaped hole in it. So when they say,
Did you alter the dwarven rings, yes or no? No, we did.
In English slang, that sounds really, really bad. And why do they all sound so camp?
Oh, Owl's beard! Enough with the quail sauce! Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
When the episode starts, Arundi the elf is running north after the orc army, and at least he didn't just appear next to them this time. He's still going to run about 1,000 miles in what the show makes look like a day, but the show has no grasp of time, and I have no grasp of time in this show. This is a show that cut away from a plotline, and when it cut back to it, a full city had been built off camera. This show is like a parody. Arundi was just running with some hero music over the top. And he's still a considerably less viable hero for me than Beric the horse was. The horse is frankly a better and more expressive actor, and this scene just confuses me, because we have Arondir hear two orc deserters coming through the woods, so he hides and lets them pass. He stands up, and another orc is just jumping down off of a rock to attack him from behind instantly. He gets rid of that one, and then the other two orcs that had passed and walked on hear the noise of the fight, and by the next shot, the orcs have teleported to either side of him, and the deserters have now decided that they want to fight. The show doesn't seem able to decide what it wants the orcs to be. In one scene it will be humanising the orcs because the show is trying to socially engineer the audience, and by the next scene the heroes will be merrily slaughtering them again, like they're still the monsters from the Peter Jackson films. And were the orcs that Arondir just did in there even armed? I didn't see weapons drawn. At the point where an orc just wants to go home and see his wife and child, just cutting them down for being an orc has long ceased to be ethical or heroic. Now, having orcs just teleporting around, is that good direction? Maybe not, but all of the directors for this season are women, so Amazon clearly have their priorities in the right place. By not having any male directors at all, they've ensured that the directing team is now 100% diverse. If only they paid as much attention to the story as they do the identity politics, but they don't. It's just a delivery method for the cack-handed attempts at social engineering. Galadriel would just attack an orc army solo because feminism, even if it makes no sense in the story and it just gets her captured. Groups of characters will be diverse even if it makes no sense in the context of the story. Eagle-eyed viewers may have spotted that in the village of the Hobbit things, they appear to have had a hobbit with Down syndrome. Orcs will suddenly get family values because the show has firm ideas to push on race determinism. Disa the dwarf is worried about the dwarves digging deeper into the earth and uncovering some kind of horrible monster, so she sings at them. I burst out laughing. I have a sneaking suspicion the makers of the show were trying to send a message about a powerful black woman changing the world with her voice, and to do that they chose Captain Hey-Ho from Swashbuckle, playing the first female dwarf of colour. I hate this show. I'm also getting a sinking feeling that Kieran Hines, playing the character of Dark Wizard, is going to turn out to be Saruman, and it really is going to F up the story of Lord of the Rings. Meanwhile, the elves have still not noticed the massive orc army that's now surrounded their city, and the show continues to be abysmal on metalworking and metallurgy. The elves are struggling to finish the 9 rings of power for men. They're still adding unprocessed ore into smelts, so their perfectly balanced magic rings would have bits of sand and random crud in them, and they failed so much that there's now a pile of random metal bits on the floor, and they can't make any more ring attempts because they've run out of mithril, we're told. The silvery metal that they get from the dwarves, and have they? Can they not just reuse the piles of metals on the floor? Or is it all magic at this point? I hate this show. Sauron is busy gaslighting and creepily manipulating everyone around him, so in retrospect, it's no wonder the media view him as a hero, role model and someone they have to write articles about one-handed. He can now completely warp Celebrimbor's mind to make him see an elven city not besieged by orcs, and don't even ask where the orcs just suddenly got trebuchets from, or why Sauron made all of this happen in the first place. I don't see how this helps him make the Rings of Power. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor tells Sauron that the dwarves are late with their shipment of mithril for the elves, so Sauron goes to see the dwarves to try and make a deal, and this whole scene for me was bizarre, because both Sauron and the dwarves act like the elves and dwarves never had a deal in the first place, and I have no idea what the story's even supposed to be, because all of this dealing happened off camera. Sauron tries to make a deal with the dwarves and just none of this makes sense. If they had a deal and the dwarves broke it, surely Sauron's first words should have been, "Why is the shipment of mithril from you late?" Instead, both him and the dwarves act like there never was supposed to be a shipment. I asked everyone I watched this show with, did you find this episode confusing? And they all said yes, including me for this part. The Dwarven King says no to Sauron about a deal for mithril. He wants the mithril for himself to make weapons and armour for the dwarves, and then later Sauron turns up back at the Elven City with a load of mithril he got off camera from the dwarves. This story is a mess. Adar and the orcs still have the elf Galadriel as a captive, and none of this makes sense either. Because just last season, Galadriel had Adar captive and gleefully talked to him about how she wanted to genocide all of the orcs. So Adar, in this, just let her put a knife to his throat and suggest that they now work together to fight Sauron. Sauron can be damaged, it appears, by the crown of Morgoth that Adar stabbed him with, which just makes it even more stupid that Sauron A, kept this around, and B, put it in the hands of someone that wanted to harm him. The other story threads in this episode are frankly a waste of time. As if the whole episode wasn't really. In Numenor, the Queen gets eaten and spat out by a giant sea monster. The hobbits talk a lot. Poppy, the female Samwise, has an interracial hobbit relationship, and Gandalf goes looking for a stick. The elves in Eregion are worried that the usual traders and artisans that come to their gates are not there, and I realise I have no idea where traders and artisans would even be coming from in this world, or who they're supposed to be, because this world feels so small and just has no coherency about it. The massive continent just feels really empty and devoid of life. This is a map of Middle-earth. In nearly 2 seasons of the show, this is what we've seen. There are some elves here on the west coast. There's an elven city, Eregion, here. There are the dwarves in Khazad-dûm here. There are humans in Numenor, somewhere out here. There are orcs around here and some burnt towns. There's a caravan of a few dozen Harfoots somewhere here. It feels like the continent is almost entirely empty.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
So you found the goat?
The Rings of Power is Amazon's attempt at a prequel to The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and there's just so much wasted money and potential in this show. The seasons and 8 episodes are so short that they barely get any use out of the props. The whole episode is mostly a long siege battle, so at least it wasn't boring, but there's just so much wrong with it. It spared the usual problems of switching storylines 15 times an episode, but it's still dogged by problems. They cleared up one problem, which I appreciated, and while doing it, made about 20 or 30 more. The writing and direction is so clunky and designed to create emotional moments, even if they made no logical sense. The orcs had set siege to the elven city of Eregion last episode because the Dark Lord Sauron was inside, and they wanted to get him before he could create magic rings and enslave them all. Sauron, the Lord of all evil and deceiver, brought the orcs here for some unknown plan, and now the orcs are demolishing the city with trebuchets that they got from somewhere off camera. The city that Sauron is currently in and needs for his plan. Towers are falling all over the city, and the elven foundry that Sauron desperately needs is in a tower, and it's just dumb luck for him it isn't destroyed, or a giant rock doesn't fall on him. The elves and the spies the show has told us they have did not notice this giant orc army surrounding their city while beating drums, and the orcs just sneaked up to their walls carrying burning torches with stealth trebuchets and a hill troll. What the show calls trebuchets aren't exactly trebuchets either. Trebuchets are supposed to have a sling at the end of the arm, and theirs don't, so the range demonstrated is probably massively over what it really would be. The orcs' plan also makes very little sense, just like Sauron's. The orcs bombard the city, and despite the orcs' main objective being to breach the walls, get inside and get Sauron, they never use the not trebuchets for the main purpose of a trebuchet, which is to breach walls. The orcs' plan is terrible. The orcs instead use the trebuchets to bring down a mountain in order to dam a river, and once again the writing is hampered by the writers and directors not seemingly knowing how anything works. The idea that a river could be dammed so easily that these chunks of rock would fill and create a permanent dam so watertight that the river would be completely dry is just laughable, and even if they did, the water level would just rise behind the dam until it flowed over the top or around it. I would have accepted the orcs going upstream and making a dam, maybe dam up the end of a valley upstream. I would have accepted redirecting the river. I can't accept this. This is rubbish. This is not how either rivers or water work. The river is stopped altogether for near a full day because the writers wanted a dramatic moment of the trebuchets throwing rocks and bringing down a mountain, what appears to be several kilometres away. Now, based on historical designs, trebuchets stood at around 18 metres tall and threw missiles, typically 37 kilograms or 80 pounds up to 300 metres. This rock that they're showing Ballpark, I'd estimate that's a few tons, unless it's hollow or made of styrofoam. So the orcs, not trebuchets, are throwing rocks that are ballpark 4,000 pounds instead of maybe 80, up to 3 kilometres instead of 300 metres. So in the spirit of season 1 of The Rings of Power, where they fit thousands of horses onto ships that would generously fit 20, the makers' maths yet again appear to be off by a factor of about 500. So that's what you get from The Rings of Power. They either do almost nothing and it's really boring, or they do something and it's stupid and ludicrous, like Galadriel taking an exploding volcano to the face that destroys the entire town around her, sets people on fire, but she walks away without a scratch on her. Pick your poison. The river dries up instantly and permanently, and the orcs then launch an infantry assault on foot across a wet riverbed, on which the river could start reflowing at any moment, and they would probably just sink into the silt and mud while the elves pelted them with arrows. But oh no, for some reason the orcs just walk right up to the wall and the elven archers are just standing there doing nothing. And have the people that made this never walked on a wet riverbed or in mud? Never mind tried to run over it. The orcs would be slipping over every few metres, and it gets worse because the orcs then drag a massive wheeled siege engine the size of a tank slowly across the silty riverbed, and it'd just sink into the silt. And secondly, it's designed to rip a hole very slowly in a stone wall. It has to be right next to the wall, so the defenders can throw rocks and put arrows in you. And we'll find out later that the orcs even built it with an exploding cauldron attachment, which seems to serve no purpose other than to cause the war machine to explode, like a daisy cutter if fire gets near it. The elven smith, Mirdania, then exclaims, "They have a Ravager," like it's supposed to mean something to the audience. The show has never introduced a Ravager before, and I have no idea how she even knows what one is. People just know things in this episode, and I have no idea how most of the time. Somehow the orcs know the exact thinnest part of the wall to attack. They just know. That part of the wall, we will find out later, is definitely not 10 feet thick, as the Elven King claimed in an earlier episode.
Region is protected by 2 rivers with miles of curtain wall of dwarven stone 10 foot thick. Rest assured, Celebrimbor and the secrets of his craft are safe.
The wall, in fact, gets thicker in between shots. In this shot, it looks about 3 foot thick. In this shot, it looks about 10. And even then, a river won't just drain unless there's a slope on it. Realistically, the river would just start flowing again within about half an hour and wash the orc army away, and that's if the dam held, which it wouldn't. And it's not like the trebuchets wouldn't work on the wall, because apparently orcs with hammers can damage it. The elves' army has also just teleported about 1,000 miles from the west off camera to come and fight the orcs, despite the Elven King saying just last episode, "We can't fight both the orcs and Sauron." So in this episode, off camera, he's decided that he's just going to take the elven army and fight both the orcs and Sauron. And as is traditional for the Rings of Power, the CGI frankly doesn't look good at all for a show of this budget. It strongly appears they just did a really bad CGI of the Elrond actor's face. And why? You have the actor! Meanwhile, Sauron is inside the city trying to finish the rings, while trebuchet shots are falling around him, and just nobody's plans make any sense in this. Sauron just comes out and declares himself to be the military leader of the city, instead of Celebrimbor. And why was Celebrimbor ever the military leader of the city? Are the elves that dim? He's not even a military leader, he's a blacksmith! I don't know. Why do the elves even accept Sauron taking command? I don't know that either. He seems to control everyone now, and it just happened off camera. The elves' army is coming from the west with the Elven King, and who's leading them? Well, it's not the king. They also have 3 generals that the show has told us exist in a previous episode. 3 apart from Galadriel, who got herself captured attacking the orc army alone for reasons. The writers wanted her to get captured, so they wrote her doing something idiotic in order to make it happen. And it's none of the other 3 generals that are commanding the army either. It's instead Elrond, the scribe and poet. I hate this show. So the elves have two military forces, one's being led by a poet and one by a blacksmith. This is despite the king stripping Galadriel of command because he feared she'd been corrupted by Sauron. Elrond has also been around Sauron, and the king just gave him command of the entire elven army. And this is Elrond, who ignored a direct order from the king in the first episode of this season and jumped off a cliff with the rings. Make any of this make sense? The elven cavalry charges the orcs, but stops when the orcs threaten the life of the captive Galadriel, and the elves stop their cavalry charge. And Adar, the leader of the orcs, says, "Welcome, Commander Elrond," and once again, how does he know? Have these two characters met before? Because the show has never demonstrated that. How does he know Elrond's rank? He just does. And then the scene cuts, and off camera, Elrond and one of the other elves has gone back with Adar to the orc encampment, and this may be the worst scene in the entire episode. There's frankly a lot of competition though. Adar wants Elrond to give him one of the 3 elven rings, because with that and the crown of Morgoth, he thinks he can get rid of Sauron forever somehow, and maybe there's scope to make a deal here for the elves. Elrond could say, "Okay, stop attacking the city, I'll talk to the elves inside, get them to open the gates for us, and we can go in together and get Sauron. After that, maybe we can go our separate ways." Adar asks to see the ring, and Elrond tells him it would be pretty foolish to bring it with him, and later it turns out that it seems Elrond had it round his neck the entire time and probably did take it with him. And frankly, it was incredibly foolish to come here at all. The orcs could just take you captive as well. Galadriel tries to talk, and Adar instructs an orc to cut her tongue out if she tries to talk again. So the orc puts a knife to her throat, because orcs are bloody useless. Sorry there, champ, he gave you one job, and that was to aim a knife at Galadriel's tongue, and somehow you still missed. Adar then explains to Elrond that all of the elves in Eregion are under Sauron's control, and once again I have no idea how he knows that. Then Adar says, Celebrimbor himself let Sauron in, and yeah, he did. I know that, the audience should know that if they've seen the previous episodes, but how does Adar know that? Characters in the Rings of Power just know things that they should have no way of knowing, and instead of trading the ring for Galadriel, Elrond tells the orcs he's going to attack them, and then leaves, and for some reason the orcs let him. Why, I have absolutely no idea. They could capture the leader of the opposing army without a fight, and the show has already demonstrated that the orcs have no basis of honour. So the loss of the entire elven army is Elrond's fault for refusing to make a deal and being bloodthirsty. I have genuinely started to think the people making this show hate The Lord of the Rings. They say they love it, and then when they make something based around Lord of the Rings, they do a character assassination on one beloved legacy character after another. Elrond then says goodbye to Galadriel, kisses her, which is a bit awkward because she's supposed to be married with a full-grown daughter at this point in the timeline. A daughter who Elrond will later marry. So, while getting off with his future mother-in-law, he passes her a lockpick so she can free herself later. The show makes a habit of forgetting who is supposed to be related to who, like Celebrimbor talking about the smith Feanor all the time in a way that's quite weird, considering Feanor was his granddad, or the Elven King Gil-galad giving wisdom to Galadriel when she's thousands of years old and was the sister of one of his grandparents. Not even a joke. Her brother Angrod was supposedly his grandfather. But they wanted to make Galadriel a younger, inexperienced version of the character, who was a mere 3,000 years old in the Rings of Power, instead of the experienced 4,500-year-old mature woman in the Peter Jackson films. Then most idiotic of all, on the way out, the elves, Elrond and the guy with him, are loudly discussing their battle plan in Elvish and how the elf with Elrond should go and tell the dwarves to flank the orc army, when Adar, the leader of the orcs, can speak Elvish and will understand if he hears them. This episode seemingly can't go 5 minutes without doing something indescribably stupid. The elves then charge, and nobody really uses any tactics in the entire of this battle. The elven cavalry just charges into orc infantry in woodland and immediately gets surrounded. Then they lose all of their horses, And from then on, the battle has all the intricacy and nuance of two 9-year-old boys having a pretend sword fight with sticks. During the battle, one of the Diversity Elves is trying to get through the Orc lines over open ground in order to reach the Ravager siege engine before it breaches the walls. And she's fine for the exact amount of time that she needs to be. Then when the writers decide it's no longer time for her to be alive, this happens. And wait, what? Were there 6 to 8 orcs just sitting off camera in a semicircle, all aiming at her saying, wait for it, it's not quite time yet, don't loose on any of the other many elves that we can see either, just that one, all on that one. I don't like her, and all loose at once, now. She's about to blow up the siege engine by firing a fire arrow into the exploding cauldron attachment that seems to serve no other purpose than to make the siege engine explode. Not sure why the orcs even added that, really. Depending on what the plot needs, the orcs are either crack shots or stormtroopers in terms of accuracy. A night has fallen by this time, and the orc siege machine is still working on that wall, and the show is seriously telling me that none of the elves standing on top of that wall thought to set fire to this very flammable wooden siege weapon with an inexplicably exploding cauldron on the back of it. What have they been doing all this time? They must have been stood there for nearly 12 hours watching that thing chip away at their wall. Oh yeah, that's what they were doing. I hate this show, and I know why they did this. I think it was to try and create an emotional moment again, and they needed an explosion, I guess, to make this seem a little bit more like Helm's Deep from the Peter Jackson films. And I've thought about why this series fails, because it's trying to be like the Peter Jackson films, and they've copied a lot of elements from them. There are hobbits, there are elves, there's magic and dwarves, and there are battles, and the best thing I can liken this to is a car. It doesn't matter if you have all of the exact correct pieces of the car. If you put the wheels where the wing mirrors are supposed to be, the car won't run. It isn't good enough to have all of the pieces. They need to be in the right order and doing the correct jobs. The loss of the Chinese diversity elf doesn't land at all, because she never got a character in the first place. The elf that was with Elrond then goes to the dwarves to ask for help. The Dwarven King refuses to help, and is instead going to dig for gold because the ring has driven him mad. So Prince Durin has to leave the mine that him and Captain Hayho have been guarding, and the absolute state of Captain Hayho. Sophia Non-Vette is a substantial amount of woman.
Oh, Owl's beard! Enough with the quail. Soft! Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
Prince Durin organises the dwarves who've noticed the king's behaviour and is about to leave with the dwarven army to go and help the elves when the king starts digging in the demon-filled mine, has cut down all of the guards, off camera of course. We just get told it's happened. So the prince takes the whole dwarven army to go and confront the king instead. Off camera of course, in order to protect their home in the mountain so they can stay safely in their houses, presumably now surrounded by orcs and built on top of a giant fire demon. Great plan. So yet again, Thursday night rolled around and I made some of my friends watch The Rings of Power with me. Afterwards, one of them said, quote, "Friends don't make friends watch The Rings of Power." One of them quite liked it though. The series is not without people who really like it, and I've had some criticism this last week from someone who said the script for The Rings of Power is amazing, because in their view it's way more faithful to the source material than the Peter Jackson films, where they'd replace the character Glorfindel in one scene of the movies with Liv Tyler playing Éowyn. And is The Rings of Power really more faithful? Really? Because the series has multiple plot threads happening at the same time. In one it has the Rings of Power being made, and in another it has the adventures of the character Isildur. And if this timeline is to be believed, that has the slight problem that the rings were made over 1600 years before Isildur was even born. Galadriel is supposed to have a husband and a full-grown daughter at this point in the timeline, and not a young daughter either. The daughter is supposed to be around 1300 years old. I also got requests for more footage of the actress Sophia Non-Vette from The Rings of Power, and also her fine work on the UK children's TV show Swashbuckle, so I'll try and work those in for you throughout the video. You're welcome.
Oh, go on then. One tune.
Yay! Oh, can't
it! I love it already!
And I have some serious questions about the realism in that clip of Swashbuckle, because Captain Hey-Ho has a guitar, but for some reason the noise coming appears to be a fiddle. 0 out of 10 Swashbuckle, 0 out of 10. That's why I say Saphir Non-Vete is surprisingly okay in the Rings of Power, because watching her in Swashbuckle, it could have been so much worse.
I am so hungry for my seafood a la slurp. Is it ready yet, Cook?
I'm just about to start making it.
And if you think she's bad in the Rings of Power, just try Swashbuckle. She's practically intolerable.
Milk! Keep the jug still. Look, not a drop spilled. Oops.
This doesn't look right.
Turn that frown upside down. Only a clown would chuck in everything he found.
And this episode is kind of like Swashbuckle, a lofty and refined vision that is undermined by silly mistakes. The more I see of Sauron's master plan, the less sense it makes. Nobody's actions in this episode make any sense. A lot of the time, the physics don't even make sense. The idea that this 200-pound, human-sized elf could bowl over this giant monstrosity of a hill troll that must weigh tons is just laughable. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor is living in an illusion created by Sauron in his tower in Eregion, and is still trying to make the 9 rings for man. And he doesn't even notice the siege until later in the episode, when he throws a hammer through a window and the scales fall from his eyes and he sees the truth. The tower and forge have been badly damaged by the siege, and there's debris all over the floor. And how would this illusion even work? Have you seen the size of the lumps of rock on the floor? He'd be stubbing his toe on fallen masonry and tripping over every couple of steps. But at least they cleared up where Sauron got the mithril from after the dwarves refused him last episode. He didn't. He used an illusion on Celebrimbor, who instead forged the rings for man using black Sauron goo. And once again I have no idea what the story's even supposed to be. What was Sauron's plan? If he was going to use his goo to make the rings, why did he go to the dwarves to ask for mithril? Was his plan to use mithril first, and then when he found out that he couldn't, he just gave Celebrimbor goo instead and hope it worked? Why did he need Celebrimbor and the Elven Forge at all, if he could make magic rings using silver and his goo? Just none of this makes sense. It's now canon that Sauron bleeds black goo, by the way, which is a bit awkward considering all the times in Season 1 where Sauron ended up bleeding before they thought of him bleeding black goo, and his blood was clearly red. Just none of this makes sense. Why do the wizards turn into moths? They showed Sauron bleeding red blood multiple times last season, not black. Granted, in this episode he created an illusion to make his blood look red, but is the show seriously trying to tell me that he was doing that last season while he was passed out? Is that it? Or did the show writers just forget what they did last season, or just not really care? This show gives me a headache, and recently I had a suspicion that the actor Ciarán Hinds in the show, playing Dark Wizard, was supposed to be the character Saruman, who was played by the great Christopher Lee in the Jackson films, and everyone has kind of been going on the assumption that this character, the Stranger, was Gandalf, and this, I think, would be really destructive to the later Peter Jackson story. You can't have Saruman turn evil, have Gandalf forget about it somehow, and then turn evil again later. But thinking about it the other day, it occurs to me that the Rings of Power has never explicitly stated that the Stranger was Gandalf, just that he's an Ishtar, an angelic spirit in the form of a wizard. So they could do something even dumber than my first suggestion, like making Dark Wizard Gandalf and the kindly stranger Saruman. And as likely as that seems, why would they character assassinate Gandalf? Well, why did they character assassinate Galadriel by making her a war criminal? Why did they character assassinate Elrond in this episode? I can think of no good options for who the Stranger and the Dark Wizard could be, because there are not many Ishtar to choose from. There are 5, and again according to the timeline, they're not supposed to arrive in Middle-earth for, let's see now, about 3,000 more years. I speculated to a friend while watching this that one of the wizards, as far as we know, could be the character Radagast, and he said, "Who?" I told him, "You'll remember in a moment when I explain. He was in the Hobbit movies being played by Sylvester McCoy. He was covered in bird droppings and had a rabbit-drawn sled." And he replied, "Oh no, F that guy." The least bad option is maybe that both the Stranger and Dark Wizard are the Blue Wizards. That would maybe be the least damaging to the story and timeline. This show has a habit of dropping in terms from the books and never properly explaining them, like Valar, Silmarils, Ishtar, which is the exact same mistake Witcher Blood Origin made. The weird part is how often completely different shows are making exactly the same writing mistakes. So at the end of the battle, the dwarves don't show up, Galadriel sneaks into Eregion, Celebrimbor escapes with the 9 rings for men that he finished for reasons. The rings are now indestructible, which just raises the question of how you'd even work with indestructible metal. No idea, it's all magic, I guess. Celebrimbor takes the rings to Galadriel, who's escaped from the orcs and infiltrated the city. Celebrimbor then takes a group of elves to confront Sauron, and Sauron just makes them all stab each other. It's all a farce. The elves find time to be stupid yet again before the end, because there are a handful left with their backs against the city wall. And do they do the sensible thing, which for me, seeing as they're massively outnumbered, would be maybe you could climb the ladders onto the wall behind you and fight from there. You can pull up the ladders behind you. No, instead, they charge the orcs and lose, and Arondir the elf tries to fight Adar and gets 2 swords through the chest for his trouble. And if that's the end of Arondir, it will be one of the most useless character arcs I've ever seen. 2 seasons with this guy, and he still barely has a character. Adar then lets Elrond live for reasons, takes the ring from around his neck, and the orcs break the city wall and storm the city. At least this one wasn't boring, but I hate this show.
Best friends are Welly. I love to eat jelly. I'm the captain of the Scarlet Squid. Her best friend's a Welly. She loves to eat jelly. She's the captain of the Scarlet Squid.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
See, you found the goat.
The Rings of Power is Amazon's prequel to The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and this series confuses me. Last season, the character the Stranger defeated some evil magic users. Now, I've watched every episode multiple times to make videos, and I still have no idea. Why did the wizards turn into moths? The show is once again back to switching storylines 20 to 30 times an episode. The show never seems to deliver the things I want to see. Vital plot points happen off camera and then the show tells me it's happened later, and this episode is just a doozy for that. Multiple people seem to come back to life off camera in this episode. This guy, Arondir the elf, got a sword and an arrow through the chest just last episode and was bleeding out on the floor unconscious, surrounded by orcs trying to finish him off. And he turns up in this episode and he's just fine now. He walked it off, I guess. He felt it so much at the time, he almost showed an emotion. I swear this guy's acting range is like Amandla Stenberg in The Acolyte. Another elf got filled with orc arrows just last episode. He was also surrounded by enemies and bleeding out on the floor. He turns up at the end of this episode and he's just right as rain. His armour isn't even scratched. The show is still presenting as very camp.
Give me the meat and give it to me raw.
Durin will come. Durin will come.
I thought about what Amazon could do to make this series more popular, and my brain, which sometimes genuinely surprises me, kicked out the idea that they could recast Galadriel to be played by Sydney Sweeney, and that idea made me chuckle. Also, can you just imagine Sydney Sweeney trying to play Lady Macbeth? The show also doesn't seem to be a faithful adaptation of the source material at all. It's supposed to be based on the appendices of Lord of the Rings and a few other sources, and those appendices lay out a timeline for the story. It's in the Return of the King book. In the show, Ar-Pharazôn is now the King of Númenor, and Sauron hasn't made the One Ring yet. And this is an issue, because in the book timeline, this is supposed to be based on Sauron made the One Ring 1,655 years before Pharazôn became king. So, you know, just minor changes. And you don't have to trust me, I'll put a link to the PDF of the book below and you can look yourself. It's on page 1422 in this version, and that's just one example of many I could give you. They kind of confirm the Stranger is Gandalf in this episode. He's not even supposed to have arrived in Middle-earth yet. At this rate, I'm half expecting Bilbo Baggins to show up in the Rings of Power. Granted, he's not supposed to be born for another 3,500 years in the timeline, but that hasn't stopped the show so far. I thought for a moment that the different story threads are not supposed to be happening at the same time, but that can't be true either because the story threads cross over each other. The Rings of Power shows Galadriel meeting Isildur before the One Ring has been made, and Isildur also won't be born for over 1600 years. So to a lot of people that will be a problem, but to me it's a far smaller one than the problem that the show has failed to make me care about a single character in it. Do you think I want to dislike this show? I don't. I'd prefer to be watching the classic and having a great time doing it, giving it great reviews. I just can't. How can I give it good reviews when characters are coming back to life off camera? This show, according to Google, has an estimated budget of $60 million per episode, and the writers they've brought in to write the show have a serious lack of experience, and frankly it shows. Episode 5 of this series was written by someone called Nicholas Adams, and before the Rings of Power they had one writing credit. One! The show has different writers for almost every episode, and to bring it all together, they have the showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, who also prior to the Rings of Power have one writing credit. Kind of. They were uncredited writers on the 2016 film Star Trek Beyond. They wrote a script with Robert Orci, who was going to direct it. The studio were clearly not happy with how it was going, because they got a new director in, and Simon Pegg and someone called Doug Young were hired to completely rewrite the script. So Payne and McKay worked on one thing before this and it went very badly, and then Amazon gave them the most expensive series in TV history. It should be a shock to nobody that this series has gone badly. I still think the format of the show is also a major problem. At 8 episodes a season, they just don't have the time to build characters or relationships and do all of the story points they want to do. And 2 years in between seasons is just far too long for me. The people I watched this show with have forgotten a lot of what happened in season 1 2 years ago. I liked it more when series were longer with over 20 episodes a season. The reduction of episodes has come, if anything, with a reduction in writing quality to go with it. I can watch shows from the 1960s and they don't have half the writing issues that the Rings of Power has. It also has the same problems as Rebel Moon, trying to do payoffs to a setup that never happened. In this episode, Isildur is going to go back to Numenor, so he's saying his goodbyes. Him and Theo share a hug. And the show has just not built up these two as friends at all. They've shared literally seconds of on-screen time together. The show presents it like they're old friends with emotional music, but they literally just met. Similarly, Isildur and his love interest. The show just hasn't taken the time to build the romance. The Numenorian prince has just turned up in Pelagia. We never saw a scene where he was planning to go there, or where he was on the way. He just appeared thousands of miles away, and this is a habit for the show. The show is a good learning tool because it's taught me so many things not to do when writing. I see now why Tolkien left so much to the imagination when writing Sauron and Galadriel, because when the focus is fully on them in this show, they don't come across as ancient or wise. They come across instead as very dim humans. Some things are best left to the imagination or just hinted at. Like this clip from the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. I watched the films again recently, and I'd love to know what's going on in there. It leaves me wanting more, but I'm not sure anything they could have shown in the films would live up to my imagination of what could be going on in there. Characters in the Rings of Power are still just teleporting around, and just know things that the characters in the Rings of Power would have no way of knowing. Last time we saw Gandalf, he was in a valley of trees, about to look for his magical staff. He just shows up in this episode at the village of the Hobbit things, exactly where his friend Nori is. He was told by Tom Bombadil last episode he had to choose between his friends or his fate of taking on Sauron and the Dark Wizard. He chose his friends off camera, which is another important plot moment that the show didn't show us. So he goes to his friends, and that, it turns out, leads him to his fate of facing Sauron and the Dark Wizard. And I'm not even sure what the show is trying to say with this. Is it trying to say that the only people that should have power are those that would choose friends over duty and the fate of the world? I don't know. Dark Wizard says to Gandalf, Manwë promised you would come, which is a slight issue because the show has never introduced the concept of what Manwë even is. Manwë is the king of the lesser gods. Dark Wizard is waiting there for him and wants Gandalf to join him. The guys with the bug masks then come in with knives at the Hobbit thing's throats, and the Hobbits declare Dark Wizard evil when he uses his magic to do in one of the bugmen in order to save them, despite the awkward fact that Gandalf did the exact same thing just a few episodes ago. If that act makes Dark Wizard evil, it also makes Gandalf evil. Gandalf says no, so Dark Wizard destroys the Hobbit thing's village and leaves. Gandalf tries to save the Hobbit things, so they start calling him Grand Elf, which isn't how he got his name in the source material either. If you've been watching my videos on this show, you would have known that last episode there was a large battle, and I was hoping that in that episode the dwarves would finally actually get to do something. We were nearing the end of season 2, and the closest the dwarves have got to a fight is this. So in the last episode, the Dwarven Prince got quite a nice speech really. He was trying to rally the dwarves to go to battle and help the elves, and I was actually kind of feeling it and looking forward to seeing them do something. Then the Dwarven King went mad, attacked the dwarves guarding the mine, and the whole Dwarven army, we were told, had to stay to deal with him. So I didn't get anything for the dwarves yet again, and also where is Ben Daniels? I complimented this show early this season for bringing in some more experienced acting talent like Ben Daniels and Kieran Hines, and then they've barely been in the show. We haven't seen Ben Daniels since episode 2, but at least in the finale I get to see the whole dwarf army going to stop the king. So this episode starts and the Dwarven Prince is going into the mines with a massive axe to confront his father the king. And where is the Dwarven army? If it's just the prince alone going down into the mines to confront the king, what are the rest of the army doing? If he was going to go alone, he could have sent the army to help the elves and his best friend Elrond. It's supposed to be one of this character's main motivations. He was going to depose his father just to make that happen last episode, and this episode he just forgets about it. While an orc army is burning the elves' city down and probably doing in his best friend, he just seems to forget all about it. This character has a few motivations. Another is to save the dwarves' kingdom, and that's what I thought he was saving the army for last episode, but fine. At least I get to see Durin take on his father, that's something. And then they just talk about the prince's childhood instead, and the prince starts crying. The king breaks through a thin wall and unleashes the demonic Balrog, who cuts him down instantly. And what? That's it? Then the show has the prince have a memorial service for his fallen father. Not take the army outside to go and help his best friend stay alive. Not immediately start sealing off mine shafts in the hope of stopping the demon in their basement destroy the whole kingdom. They have a funeral instead. He also has the looming threat of a scheming brother that may try and steal the crown, and this would maybe have some impact if they'd ever actually shown the brother and built him up as a bad guy, but they haven't. This also creates massive issues for the timeline, once again, because the Dwarven King who just got Balrogged in the mine was Durin III. In the Return of the King book again, page 1406, the Balrog is supposed to appear 3,400 years after Sauron made the One Ring. In the show, the Balrog has just appeared and the ring hasn't even been made yet, so how is this supposed to work? Did the dwarves just forget about the giant growling fire demon in the basement and discover it again later? Then off camera the dwarves decide to help the elves, whose city has just been burned down and its people massacred. The orcs get surprise attacked by dwarves, somehow, who are blowing horns while they're coming on. The writing on the show is idiotic. We get under 30 seconds of the Dwarven army actually doing something, and that's your lot. Then Prince Durin Once a message passed to Elrond after the battle. Tell him Khazad-dûm stands ready to provide aid once more, and I'm not sure that will be great comfort to your best friend, who you just didn't help when you said you would for no reason whatsoever, and thousands of his people got massacred, and the entire city burnt to the ground, and you could have stopped it, and now in the aftermath, now you'll help. The writing on this show is an insult. The Balrog isn't supposed to show up for another 3,500 years, and it's supposed to be found by King Durin VI. Meanwhile, Sauron is still torturing Celebrimbor to try and find out where the 9 rings are, and again, the writing made me laugh out loud, because Sauron has put 5 arrows into Celebrimbor before he delivers this line.
Look what you have done to yourself. All I have done has been for you.
Oh yeah, you put 5 arrows in him for his benefit, did you? And Sauron says these lines like he expects Celebrimbor to believe them. They've made Sauron into an idiot. Galadriel confronts Sauron later, and Sauron just reveals that he didn't really have a plan at all. This whole thing worked by dumb luck alone.
All this was your design from the beginning.
Please. You think too much of me.
Sauron then gets found by some orcs in the tower who are there to harm him, and it cuts to another scene. That's just after he skewered Celebrimbor. Now, I got some pushback for my last video on this show, because I think it's fair to say I was highly critical of the story last episode as well. The orcs were laying siege to an elven city, and for reasons, they were not using the trebuchets that they got from somewhere off camera to breach the walls of the city, and instead used them to hit a mountain several miles away, causing rocks to fall and dam a river. Now, I didn't like this for a lot of reasons, because firstly, that's not how trebuchets, dams or water work. Trebuchets can't even fire that far. The chance of random falling rocks causing a perfect watertight dam is frankly ridiculous, and the dam has shown, well, even if it did hold water, the water would just rise and flow over the top of the dam almost instantly. Adar, the leader of the orcs, considers himself to be the orcs' father, and the show has shown him to have the motivation of wanting to save them. Yet by making the orcs charge an intact wall covered in archers in broad daylight across a wet riverbed covered in mud, he showed a complete disregard for their lives and safety. Even in this last episode, the orcs are now storming the city, and the orcs' trebuchets are still throwing burning rocks into the city that now contains their own men. And all that was in maybe 20 seconds of film. So not only does the show have difficulty being true to the source material, the story is written does not even have internal consistency. It contradicts itself from episode to episode, and Adar's actions not matching his motivations is just one example in what could be a very long list. As an example of the show not being true to the source material yet again, the orc leader Adar thinks he can defeat Sauron using the Crown of Morgoth that Sauron reforged. And as one commenter pointed out under one of my videos, that directly goes against the source material in the Silmarillion. Morgoth's crown did not survive his fall in that book. When he was defeated by the Valar, essentially gods, Morgoth was chained, and his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck. I don't even know why Adar thinks that the crown and an elven ring can defeat Sauron, he just knows it from somewhere. Last episode had the siege battle and all that nonsense, and that episode has the same rating on IMDb as the 1987 film Predator, and I defy anyone to watch those two things back to back and tell me seriously that they think that episode of The Rings of Power is a match or better of that film, because the script for Predator is really well written. The best rated episode of this show is one from season 1. It's the one where Galadriel gets hit in the face with an exploding volcano and just walks away from it, and that sat on a rating on IMDb that would mean it's as good as films like Scarface, Heat, Aliens, and they're all classics. Again, watch them together and tell me that those things are close in quality. I got a comment on my review of last episode which said, quote, Nerd quotes historical trebuchet ammunition weights while reviewing a high fantasy show with elves and magic with complete earnestness and seriousness. And I never thought I'd see this in the wild, because it's the Patrick Willems quote. It's the "Why are you criticising Star Wars? It's a story about space wizards intended for children. It doesn't matter if it makes no sense." I got another one that said, "It doesn't matter how the orcs brought the wall down." So if Adar, the leader of the orcs, had gone up to the wall alone and farted a hole in it, that would be fine to this commenter apparently, and it wouldn't be silly because it doesn't matter how the orcs made a hole in the wall. Of course it matters! Then we had a spirited discussion before they bravely ran away and deleted the entire comment thread. The Orcs leader has a stated motivation in the show of trying to save the Orcs' lives. If he chooses an option that gets them slaughtered when there's a choice not to, it contradicts his character. Adar, the leader of the Orcs, had ordered his army to charge the elves last episode, under the orders to Then he let Elrond live, he took Galadriel's ring from him, and we last saw him about to go into the Elven City to fight Sauron. This was his main motivation last episode, higher even than saving his orc children. In this episode, we learned that somewhere off camera and in between episodes, he just changed his mind. The next time we see Adar, he's in the woods alone. My best guess is, for what happened, that Adar put on the elven ring, off camera, it purified him and his motivation changed. That would strike me as an important piece of the story to show, but they just didn't. Galadriel gets captured by some orcs and taken to Adar, who's on his own in the woods for reasons, and it appears he put on the elven ring off camera and it's made him into an elf again. Adar and Galadriel agree to take on Sauron together, but they're interrupted by orcs coming back from the tower where they confronted Sauron, and the one with the wife and child is on a stretcher. Adar goes over to see what's happened, and suddenly all of the orcs turn on Adar and tear him apart as Sauron walks into the scene. Presumably, Sauron turned the orcs to his side who were in the tower, and if he could do this, I don't know why he didn't do it earlier. They've frankly been very inconsistent in the writing of the show with what Sauron's powers are supposed to be. Maybe his powers are supposed to have grown with the creation and use of the rings, but that for me is not something the show has demonstrated well, or frankly at all. It needed some scenes directly showing that really to make it work. Galadriel and Sauron then have a long fight scene, and I didn't find any of it very thrilling. The show has just lost me completely. The choreography isn't great, it's a bit slow, and I just don't care about any of the characters. So the series ends with the elven refugees going north and founding Rivendell. Not sure what it is they're celebrating, they just lost most of their population. Isildur is going home to Numenor, where he'll probably get charged with treason, and he knows that. His father is on the run, King Pharazôn has decreed that those faithful to the elves are all traitors, and the dwarves have gone back home to argue about politics while they live with a demon of fire and darkness in their basement. The writing on this show is horrible.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.